He drank the blood of his victims, a chilling act that earned him the nickname the Vampire of Düsseldorf. Peter Kürten, the Vampire of Düsseldorf, terrified Germany in the late 1920s. His reign of terror was marked by a series of brutal and senseless murders that left the city in a state of constant fear. He committed a string of awful murders, each more gruesome than the last. The police were baffled and the public was horrified. His crimes shocked the entire nation. Newspapers were filled with lurid details of his atrocities, and people couldn't believe such evil could exist in their midst. Kürten targeted innocent people, leaving a trail of blood and fear wherever he went. His victims ranged from young children to adults, and his methods were as varied as they were horrifying. He was a monster disguised as a man, blending into society while committing unspeakable acts. His ability to appear normal made him even more terrifying. Kürten's reign of terror started in a city already struggling after the First World War. Düsseldorf was a city in turmoil, trying to rebuild and recover from the devastation of the war. Düsseldorf, like most of Germany, was still recovering from the war. The economic hardship and social unrest created a fertile ground for fear and chaos. The city was uncertain about the future. People were anxious and desperate, making them even more vulnerable to the terror Kürten unleashed. It was the perfect place for evil to grow. The shadows of the city provided cover for Kürten's dark deeds, and the fog of uncertainty allowed his terror to spread unchecked. Kürten grew up poor and abused. His childhood was marked by neglect and violence, which shaped the monster he would become. He had a terrible childhood. He suffered unimaginable cruelty, which twisted his mind and planted the seeds of his later atrocities. This twisted his mind from a young age. The violence and abuse he experienced as a child left deep scars that never healed. His early experiences with violence and strange sexual behavior planted the seeds for his later terrible acts. These dark impulses grew stronger as he got older, eventually leading to his horrific crimes. The Vampire of Düsseldorf wasn't a mythical creature, but a real man. His mugshot shows a seemingly ordinary person hiding the monstrous nature within. He was driven by a thirst for power and a need to drink blood. His crimes were not just about killing, they were about domination and control. He represented the darkest parts of human nature. His actions were a stark reminder of the capacity for evil that exists within us all. His story is a scary reminder of the evil that can hide within even the most normal-seeming people. It serves as a cautionary tale about the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of humanity. Peter Kürten's crimes became more and more violent. His descent into darkness was not sudden, but a gradual, terrifying transformation. His early acts of setting fires and small thefts soon turned into something much worse. These petty crimes were just the beginning, a mere prelude to the horrors that would follow. He loved the thrill of violence, the feeling of power over someone else's life. The rush he felt from these acts was intoxicating, pushing him to commit even more heinous deeds. One of his first victims was a young girl, Christine Klein. Her innocence and youth made the crime even more appalling. She was only 9 when Kürten attacked her, leaving her body in a field outside Düsseldorf. The brutality of the act was beyond comprehension. The brutality of the crime shocked the city. Newspapers were filled with headlines, and the community was gripped with fear and outrage. It was the start of Kürten's reign of terror. His name became synonymous with fear, and his presence cast a dark shadow over Düsseldorf. As months turned into years, Kürten continued to stalk the streets of Düsseldorf. The changing seasons did nothing to deter his dark desires. He targeted vulnerable people, often women and children. His choice of victims only added to the horror as he preyed on those least able to defend themselves. His attacks were always unexpected. He struck without warning, leaving his victims in a state of shock and terror. He would often attack in broad daylight, not seeming to worry about being caught. His audacity knew no bounds, and his ability to blend into the crowd made him even more dangerous. Kürten often used a hammer as a weapon. This wasn't just any hammer. It was old, rusty, and carried the weight of his dark intentions. The hammer became an extension of his rage, a tool through which he expressed his violent urges. He used it to beat his victims with savage fury. Each blow was delivered with a terrifying intensity, leaving his victims in a state of utter devastation. The hammer in his hands was not just a weapon but a symbol of his uncontrollable wrath. But it was how he attacked that truly set him apart. His method was not just about inflicting pain, it was about instilling fear. The way he gripped the hammer, the look in his eyes, all spoke of a man who found a twisted pleasure in his acts. He seemed to enjoy causing pain, often stabbing his victims many times even after they were dead. The repeated stabbings were not just acts of violence, but a manifestation of his deep-seated need to dominate and control his victims, even in death. What made Kürten's crimes even more horrific was his need to drink blood. This act of drinking blood was not just a gruesome detail, but a ritual that he seemed to relish. It added a layer of horror that was almost unimaginable. He was known to drink the blood of his victims, which is why he was called the Vampire of Düsseldorf. This nickname captured the essence of his monstrous nature, a predator who thrived on the life force of others. He seemed to get pleasure from this disgusting act. The sight of blood, the taste of it, seemed to fuel his dark desires, giving him a sense of power and control that he craved. It seemed to fuel his dark desires. Each act of violence, each drop of blood consumed, seemed to push him further into the abyss of his own madness. The police were confused by the increasing violence. They were faced with a series of crimes that seemed to have no pattern, no clear motive, and no end in sight. The brutality of the attacks left them baffled and desperate for answers. They had few clues and no real idea of the type of monster they were hunting. The lack of evidence made their task even more daunting as they tried to piece together the puzzle of Kürten's mind. Fear took over the city. The residents of Düsseldorf lived in constant terror, knowing that a predator was among them, striking without warning and with unimaginable cruelty. People were scared to walk the streets alone, especially at night. The once lively streets became deserted as night fell, with people choosing to stay indoors, hoping to avoid becoming the next victim of the Vampire of Düsseldorf. As more people were murdered, rumors spread. Stories of a vampire stalking the streets of Düsseldorf spread quickly. People were terrified. They avoided going out alone at night. Parents kept their children close. The newspapers were full of stories about the murders. The headlines screamed about the city's terror. The police were under huge pressure to catch the killer. But Kürten was clever. He escaped capture again and again. Amidst the fear and uncertainty, one thing was clear. A dark cloud had fallen over Düsseldorf. The city, once lively and full of life, was now covered in fear. Section 5. A city on edge. The murders continued, each one more gruesome than the last. The people of Düsseldorf lived in constant fear. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every stranger was a possible suspect. The police worked tirelessly to solve the crimes. They followed every clue, no matter how small. They interviewed countless people, but Kürten was like a ghost, moving unseen through the city. The lack of progress only made the public more anxious. People started to turn on each other, suspecting their neighbours, their co-workers, even their friends. The once strong community in Düsseldorf was broken. But even monsters make mistakes. In May 1930, Kürten committed a crime that would finally lead to his capture. He tricked a young woman named Maria Budlik into coming to his apartment. He attacked her, but she managed to escape. Maria's description of what happened gave the police a crucial breakthrough. She described her attacker in detail. The description matched a known criminal, Peter Kürten. The police finally had their man. They tracked Kürten down and arrested him. His reign of terror was finally over. But the horrors he inflicted on Düsseldorf would not be forgotten. In custody, Peter Kürten confessed to his crimes. His confession was chillingly detailed. He described each murder, each act of violence without any emotion. He seemed to enjoy reliving his crimes, describing his horrific deeds. Kürten's confession shocked Germany. The public was horrified by how wicked he was. They couldn't understand how a human being could do such monstrous things. What was perhaps most disturbing about Kürten's confession was his lack of remorse. He showed no regret for his actions. He seemed to feel no empathy for his victims or their families. He was a monster in human form. Peter Kürten's trial was a huge media event. People across Germany followed the case with a morbid curiosity. They wanted to understand what drove a man to commit such unspeakable acts. The courtroom was full every day. During the trial, Kürten seemed to love the attention. He seemed to enjoy the notoriety his crimes had brought him. He showed no remorse for his actions. He even seemed proud of his brutality. The jury found Kürten guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to death. The sentence brought widespread relief. The monster of Düsseldorf would finally face justice. On July 2nd, 1931, Peter Kürten was executed by guillotine. His death brought an end to his reign of terror, but the scars he left on Düsseldorf and on the minds of people in Germany would remain. Kürten's case became a media sensation, inspiring books, films, and countless psychological studies. His crimes forced people to talk about the nature of evil and the darkness that can hide within seemingly ordinary people. The Vampire of Düsseldorf became a chilling reminder of how vulnerable innocent people are and the constant possibility of human cruelty. His legacy continues to fascinate and horrify to this day. He serves as a chilling reminder of the dark things that humans are capable of.